that we were going to see a little bit of a turnaround. You know, one of the slides I had in the early version of this deck was, you know, we've all seen the headlines about cord cutting and cord nevers and so on. And that slide took me all of 25 seconds to build because there are so many headlines that literally say that. So, you know, one hypothesis that wouldn't have been unreasonable to go into this research with was that percentage was going to look very different when it came to the younger age segment. In fact, it's not that far off, right? So we can see here that traditional media are, in fact, key to having impact with millennials. Granted, big caveat there's a huge difference between an unmarried 18-year-old and a married 34-year-old guy with 3 kids. But nevertheless, given that a lot of media is still bought on this basis, we thought this was an interesting finding. The fourth ground truth focuses on digital. You know, I'm just pulling out, looking at one particular tactic here, or one particular aspect of frequency. You can see, you know, we've known over the years, obviously from Erwin Efron, that the guru of media planning, that frequency is crabgrass, I think he called it. Frequency is a weed. So we wanted to quantify that in terms of digital advertising. We didn't think there was enough learning around that, and this is ComScore data showing that once you get to around about 35 impressions in a month, you can actually start to harm your campaign. So basically, the rule there is if you're exposing your audience to more than 1 impression a day, you might actually be in trouble. So that basically this performed, you know, over that limit performed worse than the control group. So it's not just an asymptote; it actually gets worse. So that's a big watch out. You know, and it's easier said than done to mitigate that, to work against that, not least from the perspective of how difficult cross-device identification is. But when you look at some of the numbers around some of the exposure numbers, we know there's a big opportunity for advertisers to grab this low-hanging fruit and focus on reducing frequency potentially. So wrapping all that up, that was the sort of elevator version of some of the ROI-centric part of the ground truth, the advertising works finding. We think there's a huge opportunity for advertisers. This is 2016 data. We think that by adopting some of these guidelines around investing in multiple platforms, that advertisers can effectively unlock $31 billion in incremental effect. So massive opportunity, we think. So we're going to pivot now. We're going to fly off into the world of creative. Chris, I'm going to hand over to you to set the scene and talk about how important creative is and what we can do about it.
Thank you, Jasper. And I think the thing is this. You know, for those of us who've been in the industry, we all know how important the creative message is. Optimizing media is critical, but one of the things we've seen time and time again is the impact of great creative. And in fact, great creative can contribute up to 3/4 of the impact in market compared to 1/4 of optimizing media. They both need to go hand in hand, but we can't forget the importance of getting the message right. So if we can go to the next, Jasper. And I think what we see is that the synergistic effect is that a consistent, unified creative strategy delivers the strongest results. That headline can't be overlooked. And what we've seen is that for those advertisers who are customizing their creative to the platform built from a unified creative strategy, that delivers a 57% increase in effectiveness over those advertisers who are executing non-unified or executing creative across platforms from a non-unified campaign. That is to say that they're customizing not just the media but also the message. So what are the neural pathways to get us to great creative? And I hope the audience will forgive me. I'm filling in for our friends Drs. Horst Stipp and Manuel Garcia. I do not claim to be a neuroscientist or a PhD like both of them, but I will try my best. But both Horst and Manuel have learned and reiterated to us throughout their work over this past year is that there are 3 really key elements. Is that Cross-platform outperforms a single platform in creative as well as media. It is critical to unify, to have those creative strategies unified across the platforms. But as noted, to really leverage the impact of the different screens, it's important to customize the execution to each platform. So, how do you do that? What is it that we've learned? Well, number one, again, reiterating what Jasper shared about the impact of the ROI impact across media platforms, we also see that impact in creative. For example, when there is a combination of TV and mobile, there's a 30% increase in purchase intent. Unfortunately, many advertisers are not following these best practices. Again, they're leaving money on the table. Roughly a little more than a third, we commend them for following these guidelines, working from a unified creative strategy and customizing that creative to the platform. But there's nearly more than 6 out of 10 advertising campaigns which are either not working from a unified strategy, or the strategy may be consistent, but the execution is not customized to take advantage of the unique elements of each platform. Again, that's the opportunity for many of us. So, as we said, by leveraging these best practices, the opportunity exists to boost the impact of your creative message by 57%. A unified creative strategy that is customized to each individual platform. Now, why is that, and how do you get there? Well, one of the key learnings is this. And if we go to the next page, Jasper, one of the things I think we can all even recognize in our own media consumption behavior is that we're multitasking. Oftentimes, if you're watching if you're watching TV at home, you probably are head down looking at your mobile device, scrolling through your Facebook news feed or some other some other form of media consumption. And our friends at Nielsen Consumer Science and working with Turner Broadcasting have really identified a very interesting observation, is that there's a snapback effect, in particular when audio is recognizable. And that's really one of the impacts we see, is that when you start to customize and you start to leverage the unique elements of each individual platform, take advantage of all aspects to it. For example, for many of us, we think of TV as a video only. It's important not to overlook the relevance and the importance of sound in great TV advertising, because it does help to get consumers to snap back from that second screen. And you do so with such things as sound, alarming sounds, sort of a rhythmic beat, or really distinctive cues that consumers can recognize. So, Jasper, if we think about all of this, pull it all together, and you go to the next page, the thing that, whether it's neuroscience or it's ROI measurement, the thing that we always reiterate is this: you've got to have good quality data, because if your data is bad, then your decisions will tumble like a house of cards. And so let me transition here from the impact of cross-platform learning in media and creative to the importance of data quality. And when we think, and one of the things that we shared with folks at last year's Rethink was this: we had reviewed dozens of different journal articles. We engaged tens of media luminaries in the industry, and we really proposed 4 different guidelines for optimizing consumer surveys on mobile devices. Because if you think about this, what's gone on in the consumer survey and the consumer research industry is that over the past 2 or 3 years, the number of consumers taking surveys on mobile devices has more than tripled, where in the last year the number is now nearly 1/4 of all surveys are started on mobile devices, and yet people don't complete them on those devices. They drop off at a higher rate. So it's important that we recharge the battery on our mobile research. 4 guidelines. Why is it important? It's because growth generations are mobile. The highest proportion, you get a high proportion of millennial and multicultural consumers are responding to surveys on mobile devices. It's important to get this right and get the data right, because that's where businesses are seeing or will find their growth in the coming years and decades. We've done work on data quality for years at the ARF. When we first did this work about almost 10 years ago on PC-based online research, we said survey length ought to be 20 minutes. Here we say 10 or less. How do you get there? You've got to design a survey that's thumb-friendly. And finally, the opportunity for us as an industry is to evolve how we do consumer research from the traditional clipboard surveys of the, was a man in the street interviewer in the George Gallup days. How do we migrate and evolve to more of a handheld dialogue? So let me focus on 2 elements here. Let's focus on survey length. As I mentioned, our work on what's called our FOQ, or Foundations of Quality Learning, on PC-based surveys said, hey, 20 minutes was good. You could manage that. Consumers would stick with you. If you went to 30, you ran some risks over 30 minutes, and I was guilty of this in my prior life before the ARF. You went too far. Consumers on mobile devices are distracted, as we know. They're in line at the grocery store. They're watching the kids' soccer meet. There's other things going on. If you're going to keep their attention, keep the survey length to 10 minutes or less. Again, you've got a window where you can maybe push it to 20, but you're risking things. Over 20, you've gone too far. The challenge is, how do you get all of the information that we know clients and marketers want in a 10-minute survey? It's important to redesign how that survey looks. It's got to be thumb-friendly. I think we've all been guilty of these glamorous grid designs you see on the left-hand side of the screen. It just doesn't work with fat thumbs. We've got to redesign surveys so that they load quickly, they're clear and legible, and they're engaging. Take the grid, break the question into individual components, or change the question, the language of the question itself. It's important, and if we're able to redesign surveys that are more consumer and thumb-friendly, actually the consumer may stay with us longer than that 10-minute guideline. And that's actually part of what we're going to be doing in 2017. So I'm going to turn it back to Jasper, and he's going to talk more about all of our upcoming work in 2017. Jasper?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. So on to 2017. So we did all this research last year. The question was, okay, how do we create that value again for the ARF members? What are the topics that we need to look at next? And there are a few options, right? There are some direct follow-ups from this work here, the 3 aspects of this work. There are evergreen topics in the industry, effective frequency, where, all that kind of thing. And then there are hotter topics too: ad fraud, ad blocking, context, all that kind of stuff. So we went through a long process to try and figure out what we thought was going to deliver the most value to the ARF membership, and we landed on 3 topics, which are a mix of follow-ups and some unrelated to the previous work. The 3 topics are as follows, and these are the ones that we're doing the work on right now. First of all, creating effective mobile advertising. What are the best ways to create mobile advertising that doesn't disrupt consumer experience? And that's a direct follow-up from the Manuel and Horst work on the neuroscience-derived work, looking or established the benefit of customizing the ad to an individual platform. So that's the first piece. The second piece and Chris will go into a little bit more detail in a minute, builds on his research that you just saw a second ago, which is how can surveys be designed to take advantage of the unique ways in which communication takes place on mobile. So again, it's an optimizing mobile research project. And then third, and this is not necessarily a direct follow, but addresses what is at one time what is an evergreen issue in the industry, but also something which is a really hot topic, which is context effects. And how do those stack up next to targeting and you know, all the tactics that are used in programmatic buying? So that's our third area. So we're going to take just 5-10 minutes now to go through in a little bit more detail on these three projects. You can get a sense of how you might want to get involved, whether you're a research provider or a media company or a marketer, and then Mark will wrap up and probably make it make more sense than I have done. So let's go into the first one then, the creating effective mobile advertising. What do we mean by that? Well, we know obviously that you know the mobile ad world is growing hugely, massive year-on-year growth. I think ad spend in mobile is like coming up to 40% year-on-year growth. Huge amounts going in, and yet when we toured this research around all the partners, the advertisers and marketers and media companies that we took it to predominantly last year, you could feel in the room, you could literally see in the room the appetite there was for more knowledge around how to do mobile well. Both from a creative kind of executional element perspective. I mean, not that there are any strict rules, but we think there are probably some guidelines on what works on mobile. And then second, we want to understand why. So then we can lean on some neuroscience for that. So more research we thought was needed. We know there's an appetite in the industry for this. So the way we're going about it is basically twofold, and the first part is being worked on right now. It's Manuel is interviewing some of the world's leading creative experts around on the way they approach designing creative for mobile. What are the ways they do that differently for TV and indeed other platforms? What are the techniques they use? What are the considerations? And then secondly, and this is going to be the second phase of the research, which will be available in the summer and a little earlier to those of you who want to get on board early, is to look at the different kind of formats that work on mobile. So you're comparing autoplay versus click-to-play. You're looking at placement like pre-roll, in-stream, and adjacent. And then finally, we thought this is a really interesting one, and pretty hot topic right now, is the question of payoff or value. And the reason why it's a hot topic is obviously because of ad blocking, right? Ad blocking, consumers are blocking ads because they find them annoying. That's, general. I think it was IAB put out a report a few months ago, listed the top 10 reasons, and I'm pretty sure annoying was number 1 or 2. So, we want to figure out, okay, what are those adverts that consumers perceive to be not annoying? Are they in fact adverts ads that have promised some kind of value exchange with the consumer? And obviously there are a whole bunch of different ways of providing that value. So we wanted to test that out. In terms of deliverables for this, which I think is going to be a really cool project, first of all, comprehensive review of best practices for mobile creative. And then secondly, a quantification and comparison of the effectiveness of different ad formats, ad experiences in the context of those creative strategies. So that's the first project. Manuel is leading that. I think that's a really cool one. I know there's a lot of appetite in the industry for that, so we're super excited to unveil that, not only to the sort of earlier sponsors who get the early access, but also to the industry and membership at large, but at a later stage. So that's the first project. I'll shut up now. I'll pass over to Chris, who's going to go into a little bit more detail on his project, which builds on the mobile work that you just saw.
Okay. Thanks, Jasper. Again, as I mentioned previously, the consumer is, they're responding the way they want to for all of our consumer surveys. And this figure's on the left from 2015, and they've continued to increase in the 12 months since then. As I said, nearly a quarter are responding on smartphones, and yet the completion rate is 10% lower on smartphones than they are on desktops. The consumer is distracted, they've got other things going on, and frankly, that's not a good place for us to be as an industry, with an increase in penetration but a decrease in effectiveness. So we thought, how do we increase the effectiveness of our surveys on mobile devices? Well, consumers already speak to each other in a unique language, and that is emojis. Can we borrow that emoji language that consumers are already comfortable with and embed it in our surveys to make the experience more enjoyable, increase completion rates, and have the same quality of data that we have from our other modes of interviewing. So, Jasper, if you go to the next page, what we're doing right now is this. We're actually we're going in field over the next in the next week with 2 partners, GfK and Focus Vision, and each of them we're rewriting some standard surveys that have long-standing benchmarks. And the intent is this. We're, on one side, we're interviewing people on their PC, and the other half will be asked to reply on their mobile device. Survey length of 10 minutes and a range of different types of response options, liking, agreement, yes, no. And again, what we're doing is side by side. One group of people will see the text version, one group will see an emoji. In addition, we're not just testing emojis, but we're also looking at other kinds of visual scales. Star scales, for example, are fairly common. Is that something that we can easily import into a survey design to make the experience more effective? Our hypothesis is this. By speaking a language consumers are comfortable with, we will increase completion rates, we'll improve the respondent experience, and we'll have the same quality of data. It might even be better on some of those emotional measures. As I said, we're in the field within days, and we will be sharing our findings at our annual conference on March 2021. Jasper?
Thanks, Chris.
You want to talk about the last one? Yep.
Perfect, yeah. So the third project, which we've pithily called Cookies versus Context, although we think it's probably a little bit more complex than that. The setup for this is around programmatic buying, right? It's eating the world in digital. It's programmatic. 2/3 of display and video ad spend is bought programmatically in last year. I mean, the figures on programmatic TV will vary according to what your definition of programmatic TV. Some people say 6% by 2018. Some people might think that's a little bit an aggressive estimate. But whatever, it's making incursions in programmatic TV. Something we've all been talking about for the last couple of years. The challenge with some of this, or one of the things to consider is that audience targeting, obviously, there's a ton of data around how impactful it is, how you can increase ROI, increase sales lift, sales impact with audience targeting. But what it has the potential to do is to ignore or leave on the side context. And we know there's 50, 60 years worth of research on the impact of context in its various guises, and obviously context is a simple word for a very, very complex topic, or complex topics, I should say. So what we wanted to do here was to shine a light to help advertisers understand the impact of context versus, or indeed in combination with audience targeting and the types of technique used in programmatic. One of the challenges with bringing those two things together is that a lot of the research that I mentioned a second ago on programmatic or audience targeting is generally backed up and supported by sales lift and ROI type figures, whereas if you look at the context research, and Horst and I have had the distinct honor over the last 4 or 5 months reading literally every article that's ever been produced on the topic, there's not a $ anywhere near it. It's all upper funnel metrics, it's all favorability, brand recall, ad recall, and all that kind of stuff. So we thought there was a big opportunity to bring those worlds together, to quantify context, and specifically to look at 2 different types of context. And the one thing about the literature in the context space is that there are a whole different contexts, a whole different set of contexts that are being tested, and a whole different set of KPIs used to measure them. So we've zeroed in on what we think are 2 key ones for advertisers. First of all, alignment. And that might be, I think, the way that a lot of people think about context if you ask them, which is basically the relationship between the ad and the surrounding content. So academics use the heinous terms like thematic congruity, all that kind of stuff. But what it basically means is there alignment between the ad and the surrounding content. So for example, a sneaker advert in a sports program, or an advert for a food, type of food in a cooking show. So that's the kind of alignment we're going to be looking at there. We're going to be measuring from an ROI perspective, from a sales lift perspective, what effect that has. The second type of context effect that we're looking at is what we've called, and it's probably a little bit simplistically, we're calling it attention, but what it really means is, as opposed to looking at the relationship between the ad and the content, you're looking at the relationship between the consumer and the content. So I'm a big soccer fan, for example, which puts me out on a limb out here in the States. But I read look at a lot of soccer websites, probably more than my colleagues at the ARF realize. The question is, am I more inclined to buy something I see an ad for on a soccer website than I am if I see on something I don't care about, whether that be knitting or tapestry or something like that. So we know there are certainly some effects there, but we want to try and quantify what that looks like from a sales lift or ROI perspective. So that's the cookies versus context. That's the concept from an executional perspective. We're just using this very simple hypothesis that targeting outweighs the impact of context. We'll see. And there are two types of deliverable here, basically. First of all, we want to quantify the sales impact of context effects and stack those up next to the impact of programmatic campaigns. And then secondly, beyond just quantifying, we want to share with sponsors and ARF members what best practices are, in terms of, not only in terms of targeted campaigns, but also in terms of contextually optimized advertising. Now, what should I actually do? So those are the three projects: the mobile creative one, the mobile research one that Chris talked about, and then the cookies and context one here. So you've had enough of my voice by now, I'm sure. I'm going to hand over to Mark to talk to you about how you can get involved if you're interested in these things.
Yeah, so hopefully you're finding this very exciting. We've done a lot of research as Jasper meant leading into this to find out what the kind of white spaces are in the industry and how we're going to do things that make a difference. And essentially, we want you to get involved. Obviously, as members and conference attendees, you'll certainly have an opportunity to see all this research when it's done. But if you could get involved up front, your engagement will help make the research actually happen, will help make the research better, and also will help make the research most relevant to you. In the past, we've looked at opportunities where people can get involved with one research project and another, and things got kind of confusing, and most people wanted to get as much learning as they could across everything. So we're really looking at all three of these experiments as one combined group. And so if you're involved with the ARF, then you're involved with all. And then from a benefit standpoint, if you decide to be a sponsor, here's some of what you get from it. Prior to our presenting this on the ARF stages, particularly the annual conference in March and audience measurement in June, and some of the other regional events around the country, we have summit meetings that are with the sponsors, with the research providers, with the people that have contributed to the meta-analysis, and those are very spirited, I would say, interactive discussions as we try to move from all the findings that are out on the table to the conclusions that are going to be part of the final report. So being a sponsor actually lets you influence and be part of that discussion. Also, obviously, we get to those conclusions before we're standing up on stage. So as a sponsor and being part of those summit meetings and those types of things, you will also get the conclusions in advance, which creates a sort of embargo period, if you will, but you essentially get competitive advantage because you have both the raw data that you saw from the findings coming in and a heads up on the conclusions before we release that publicly. Sponsors also receive a half-day custom readout. So the reality is that when we present this research, we present it at our conferences and at our events, and a small percentage of our members are able to come there. We hope more than less, but people get to come and see those conclusions live. In addition to that, if they want to go beyond what they could see on our stage, all the information is in the ARF Knowledge Center, and through Power Search could be called up and reviewed on demand on your own. But the reality is that it's not human nature to go out and seek things that you weren't really familiar with that were there. And so we don't get a lot of pickup from that, or as much pickup as we would like from that. So as a sponsor, in addition to getting all of the things in advance, after the conferences in the second half of the year, we'll pick a date and a place of mutual convenience, and we'll actually come out and give a customized presentation of the data to your whole team. And so it's not just one person or two people or three people that happen to see the information being presented on one of the stages, but you could actually rally people within your organization to get the learning and get the impact of it. Beyond that, from a more sponsorship standpoint, obviously, when you saw the first slide that Jasper put up for this last year, we had a panel of logos on the bottom so that we're identifying the folks that are involved and made that happen, and you would get that recognition on our web and in any publications or PR that goes along with it if you'd like. And again, the statistics of the people that was exposed to that Jasper shared at the beginning
shared with 15,000 ARF members, 4,000 event attendee sort of stuff. It's in 150 knowledge center responses, so pretty widely
do. And then if all of those self-generating ROI things didn't get you, we hope that part of the reason that you're a member is that you help us meet our mission, and your support of this helps make these things happen and helps us do what you joined us to go do. Now, the interesting thing from a value standpoint, we're very flexible with how we look at the value that's provided. Obviously, we cash checks. It's probably cashing checks is one of the things that we do best. So financial support is welcome. But if you have brand creative and want to be in the specific test and want to volunteer that brand creative for the test, we need that to make the test work. The cool thing with that is any of the public presentations, any brands that are participating, we would only go out publicly with either aggregated or masked findings. No one would know which brands were actually in the studies. But if you were a sponsor and you got the half-day custom readout, then we would come to you and we would give you the results for your specific brand and how that compares to the aggregate and the other brands that are in the study. For the context IRI lift study, we're going to be looking for folks that are willing to give us a media plan and have activity during some 8-week period, probably toward the end of 2016. So tentatively for now, think of it as like September, October 2016. And again, if you supplied us the media plan, that would give IRI the ability to go back and implement the list findings. In addition to the original research that has been described by Jasper and Chris, a big part of this is continuing to look at what's in there from a meta-analysis standpoint. So if you have studies that are in these topic areas, this is particularly to research providers that have not been widely published, and you want to allow us to include that again on a vast or aggregate basis into the overall findings, we would add that and count that as value. And then there's some folks, for example, Jasper talked a little bit about the involvement, or he didn't, but in the context, part of it is an involvement with Pinterest, and that was Pinterest coming to us and wanting to do an additional study at their expense, more or less, and adding it into the total pool. So obviously we're having those, and again, financial support is another way. Bottom line is we're very flexible for types of support. We're looking for about $50,000 of value, and that could be either cash, it could be some of these in-kind things that you see above you, or it could be some combination of those two things. And again, we're very flexible about that because we are just looking to make this happen for the industry. The other thing that I want to let you know, in terms of volunteering brand creative for testing, which was the first way to get involved, obviously that's much easier to do if you're actually an advertiser. For those of you on the phone that are solution providers or agencies, you're not precluded from that. If you bring one of your clients in and get the client to participate, it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal. So we would extend the sponsorship to both you and your client for providing that value. So I'm going to go back and just put the actual overviews of the studies back on the screen and kind of open it up to questions. And you know, are those questions about the methodology and what the hypotheses are for the study specifically, or questions on how you can get more involved and engaged?
Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Oh, okay. You guys ready for questions?
Sure.
Regarding the TV and digital combination, are there other category views you can share?
Sure. Yeah, there's a whole. I mean, the slew is underplaying. A lot more slides that we can share with any ARF member who wants to see this stuff from last year at this stage. Particularly in terms of the TV digital combo, the headline there is that the higher involvement in your category, so if you're in pharma or finance or travel, the greater that kicker effect is. If you're in a lower involvement category, so apologies to some of the CPG companies, but it's one way of characterizing it, you know, it's lower purchase price and quicker cadence of purchase, then that kicker effect is going to be less, it's going to be smaller. But there's tons and tons and tons of more data and slides, so anyone who wants to see the full results, either of the ROI stuff or the creative neuro stuff or Chris's stuff, just ping me. It's jasper@thearf.org. Remember, it's got a the in front of it, so it's jasper@thearf.org, and I'll make sure that you get everything you need.
In addition to that, you know, once again, I encourage all members to use our Knowledge Center. So in addition to the summary slides that have been presented on the stages, some of the presentations from the solution provider participants are also available to call up through the Knowledge Center.
Next question, did you look into how to sequence advertising across platforms?
We did. We released those results at Audience Measurement last year. They're fascinating. It's Manuel's work. Again, same applies for in terms of what Mark said about Power Search or what I said in terms of pinging me, and we'll make sure you see those results.
Okay. That's all the time that we do have for questions. I thank you both for presenting ARF's research study to our webcast crowd. If anybody would like to continue the conversation or have any other questions for our presenters today, please email me at zina@thearf.org, and I can connect you with Mark, Jasper, or Chris. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you at next week's webcast with Forethought Research. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.